Before we get started with this episode of the Artists and Emotions podcast, I want to give a little bit of a trigger warning that this episode contains subject matter such as depression, discussions of depression, crisis of faith, and what it's like to feel like you're alone in the world and feeling like the world around you is crumbling in on you. If this is subject matter that you feel you are not comfortable listening to or that it may trigger you in some way, I highly recommend not listening to this episode of the podcast. But without any further ado, let's get started. Welcome to the Artists and Emotions podcast. My name is Cody Alexander Curtis. I'm your host, and today I have a very special guest with me. Someone who I have not seen in probably 7 or 8 years. We went to college together. We did a pretty intense theater program at a little school known as Brigham Young University, Idaho. And this individual is, as far as I know, one of the most talented people I have ever met. Also, one of the most bubbly and one of the most funny. This is Kirsten Rast, everybody.
Hi.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing.
I'm doing. You know what? I honestly have at some point just started telling people, same soup, just reheated.
Yeah. That is a perfect analogy, if I'm going to be honest.
Same soup, reheated. And then people are like, I go, yeah, how are you?
Yeah, okay. Here's the thing. Just before we even started, we were talking about how we're not geniuses, we're actors.
Yeah.
You can't say that when you come up with metaphors like that, okay? It's just not fair to all of us regular mortals here, all right?
Listen,
Anyway.
I'm a Ravenclaw. It's in my nature to be witty. So it's like, you can't help it.
I mean, that's funny. I'm a Slytherin, so it all works out.
I'm surprised how many friends that I have that are Slytherins, because I try to be around like everybody at some point, but I'm surprised how many friends I have that are Slytherins. So yeah.
I mean, it works. So, okay, we have not seen each other in 7
Mhm.
years.
Oh,
I
know.
do want to catch up, but first, I
Mhm.
want to. What have you been up to as of late? What's going on?
Well, I went to school to become a master esthetician, so I could have a day
Nice.
job that I'm just as passionate about as doing theater and acting. Graduated in March, and I'm still pounding the pavement to find something. Who knows? Maybe when this podcast airs, I will have aesthetics work. But it is just as competitive, in my opinion, as theater is to get your foot in the door. So I have my work cut out for me. But right now, I work as a standardized patient at a medical school. So basically, I do acting um, during the week as my part-time job while I'm looking for my career. So other than that, I'm doing well. Reading a book a month, trying to keep my brain going.
Good. Okay, you're reading a book a month. We're gonna have some stuff to talk about on this podcast, that's for sure. But
Yay!
for everybody who might be asking, what is an esthetician?
So an esthetician, so a lot of people go to a dermatologist, right? To
Yep.
see like anybody to help with their acne or like a lesion that they're like, I don't know what this is on my arm. Please tell me or remove it. My job is I'm a skin specialist. So if someone were to come in and saying that they're having dryness, they are worried about any hyperpigmentation or sunspots that are going on, I would be able to help them and be able to not just do facials, but I can also do laser hair removal. I can do tattoo removal. I also can perform um, one of my favorite treatments to do is microneedling. I also love doing chemical peels because basically you're administering a concentrated wound on the skin to try and heal itself or to try and improve whatever your concerns may be. So
Gotcha.
yeah, I'm like a skin specialist, essentially.
So you're a skin genius is what you're telling me.
I am, yes. Like after I went to school, I made everyone in my family go on a skincare regimen, and their skin has never looked better.
Yeah, and here's the thing. For anybody who is not on a skincare regimen, highly recommend. Highly, highly recommend And if you're not going to listen to me,
Please,
we have a
please,
skincare specialist on the
please.
podcast now. But we've talked about that. Let's turn back the clock a little bit and
Absolutely.
let's talk about when we first met. You know,
Ooh.
the earliest memory that I remember of us meeting
Mhm.
was it was either for some class or some recital you had going on, but you had in the commons, you had a copy of Baby It's Cold Outside. And you were literally calling out for volunteers to come and help you rehearse it. And for whatever reason, I was like, hey, I got nothing going on. Let's see how this goes.
I don't remember this at all. It's probably one of those things where I'm like, I will never remember this. This was a poor way to try to make friends.
Hey, it's great. Now let me ask
But I
you,
got you.
do you remember one certain instructor we had named Hiram Conrad? Who, for those of you who are unaware, we had a nickname for Hiram, and we called him the male version of Meryl Streep's character in Devil Wears Prada.
He was the Miranda Priestley of our theater department, and that is the hill I will die on. He was the Miranda Priestley of our theater department. Like, I cannot tell you the stress this man inflicted upon his students. Like, but as I got older and was in his, I had to take his actors and emotions class,
You and
which
I were in that same class together.
that was terrifying because people are like, oh yeah, that's a dangerous method, and you're like, then why is it being taught to us?
It's like, here, let me teach you all about, look, you have your check off and your method. Let me teach you about mosaic acting, which
Like,
is all about your body, your emotions. By the way, can we get you to cry by the end of the class? Let's
oh my
certainly try.
gosh. I cried not because of the acting, but because of how stressed and tired I was. Like, honey, I did not drink water the entire time I was in that class. I lived on Mountain Dew Baja Blast and ramen. I don't know how I'm alive.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting for me because there were a couple of courses we had together. One was the actors and emotions thing, and then the other was children's theater with
Oh,
Omar.
see, that's a whole different breeze because Omar is just so kind and so open to hearing ideas from the students, being like, "What kind of show should we do? Do you think we should try this? What do you think we should do in this scene?" And so for it's easier to work with Hiram with no, not Hiram. Oh my gosh. It's easier to work with Omar because Omar is just he is such a storyteller. And so it's just easier to work with and get along with him. And by the way, if he ever sees this podcast, hello, Omelet, how are you? Um,
I
we
love
have
it.
this running joke that there was one day where he misspelled my name as Kristen instead of Kirsten. And I went, Omar, how long have you known me for? He goes, I'm so sorry. I'm like, I forgive you, Oliver. And so now we just mispronounce each other's names constantly, even
Yeah,
on birthdays. So
yeah, yeah.
I love him.
I love that. But yeah, that was a good time. One of if not the best memory I have of going to that school was when we put on Omar's show for the kids.
Oh,
That was
it's the
because
best.
the amount of times that we fooled around backstage and
Yeah.
laughed about everything, it was the best.
Especially for the pre-show, because we would come up with things to do for the pre-show, like when Stephanie did Black Horse on a Cherry Tree, and we decided that we were going to pop out from like the sides of the stage or under the curtain, under the scrim, and do the woohoos.
Yeah.
See, that was fun. That's a fun time. So, yeah, 10 out of 10. Would absolutely do that again.
Yeah, which there's quite a lot that's happened that I need to catch you up on. But one thing, I don't know if you know this, but one of our classmates, Jordan, pulled me into co-directing a elementary school version of The Lion King with him.
Oh, that's right. That's right. I forgot about that.
That's why literally every single time I came to class, I'm like, "Hey guys, don't worry. I'm just dying over here. It's
It's
fine.
fine. It's fine. It's
D
fine.
do I need a nap? Am I stressed out? Am I gonna cry because I've got Hiram's class in like 30 minutes? Yeah, but it's okay."
It's okay. It's okay. Don't worry. My last semester, I don't know how I made it. I don't know how I'm here. Oh, oh, it
But
was so tiring.
But yeah, I do wanna ask you about that. And of course, this podcast is not meant to be a talking head thing. So if you have any
Fine.
questions in terms of catching up or anything else, feel free to ask. But
No, feel free.
I wanna ask, after you got out of college, what did you end up doing?
So after I graduated from college, I started working at a prop auction warehouse and I was
Okay.
auditioning for theater as well. And I was also working part-time as a princess party performer as well. So I had like basically two jobs and I was auditioning for theater. So yeah, I basically did that up until COVID hit. And then COVID hit and then I sadly had to move and leave my job. And now I'm in a completely different state where the theater here is just insane and it's hard to get your foot in the door. And it's just interesting to see the different cultures when it comes to theater in one state versus another. And so the new state that I live in is Utah. So it's very interesting to see the difference between the two.
And where were you living originally?
I was living in Southern California I was born and raised there in Los Angeles. So, yeah, I was more interested in doing theater, not TV and like my dad was working in. So,
I mean, that's very that's that actually brings up more stuff we can talk about because I
yeah.
am more in the TV and film world now than I am in the theater world. But I do want to get back into theater. It's been a while since I've done a
Yeah.
show.
It's
But
so different. I feel like with theater you feel more I don't want to say alive, but like, you feed off the audience. It's great to be there with the people watching it so that you can know how they're feeling and therefore give off like the energy that they need and what I need to
yeah,
make the story go on.
I mean, yeah, look, I love television and film, but I was talking with a couple buddies of mine who they haven't done any theater, but one of them has been singing. He's like 32 and he's been singing since he was 5. And
Wow.
it's like we all collectively agreed, look, we all love this, but
Mhm.
nothing beats a live audience. Nothing
It's so
ever
true.
will.
Mhm.
It's like nothing will ever be a live audience.
Oh,
But with the competitiveness of the theater in Utah,
mhm.
what has it been like? Like working the job that you currently have and trying to still pursue this thing?
It's actually pretty rough because I'm working part-time, I'm also still doing princess work in Utah, for another company, and I'm also searching for, an aesthetics job, and it's hard because you look for something that you're just as passionate about as theater, like, I've loved doing theater since I was, like, 7 years old, and trying to find a place that best fits both those worlds because rehearsals happen at night. And also, I don't know, like, if I'm going to be doing a show that's like the rehearsal space is like 40 minutes away, or it's going to be a commute from work to rehearsals to back home. And so there's a lot at play here with trying to figure out where is the best place that I should work and that wouldn't be too hard on me if I was to be in a show that's maybe like all the way in Orem, which is going to take, depending on where I am, quite a while to get there or not as long to get there. So it really just also depends on if the place that I would work at is willing to help and accommodate. Like if I am going to get cast in the show and they want me to work like 12 to 7, if there's a way I could move my shift or probably cut back on my hours. So there is a lot to come to it and just see if our schedules are a good fit. So that's basically what it is essentially.
Gotcha. I mean, that is always the question when you can't do
Mhm.
this thing full time is scheduling.
Yeah. That's just how it is nowadays. It's like, oh my gosh, I haven't seen you in so long. When can we hang out? Are you free in November? Like,
Yeah. Look,
that's all I have.
I'm gonna just I have said this before. The reason why I started this podcast is because I wanted an excuse to actually have people I haven't seen in like a long time because we're all like,
Yes.
hey, we should definitely talk and hang out. Oh, your next availability is next June? That's fine. We'll
Great.
make it work.
Right? How do you make it work with you doing like how is it out there in Georgia with like film and TV? I want to know how that's going
It's
with you.
It is. It is. I will say it's incredibly busy.
Oh,
One of the big things is because the actors and writer strikes that are
yeah.
going on right
Mhm.
now. We're still trying to maneuver around that. Luckily, the indie
Yeah,
circuit is still going, which I
great.
absolutely adore.
Yes.
But I mean, essentially, my if I'm gonna give you just like an average day,
Mhm.
if I have to be at like, let's take this morning, had to be up because I work at Starbucks when I'm not doing
Nice.
all this.
Free drinks.
So an
Oh,
average day, okay, gonna hit this off with a bang. I usually wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning. So do that so I can edit an episode of this podcast for like an hour before I have to go to work. I will go to work till about 11:30 or noon.
mhm.
Head to work out for like 2 hours, and then after that's done, come home, get a quick shower, and before I eat anything, I will spend time finding auditions, making self tapes, checking in to see what classes I need to sign up for, and then if I've got episodes of the podcast like today, sometimes I will skip food and go right from one interview, which I did before you, and then another interview, and then I will be clocking out at 7 o'clock and collapsing. So that is, and if it's a day where I do not have the podcast, I'll just keep doing auditions.
If oh my gosh. If it helps, last week I had to do a party in a place that was like an hour and 10 minutes away, and I I had the last time I had eaten was 6:30 that morning, and then I didn't get to eat again until 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
I mean, that's okay. I think this is the
We're
one common trait I find with,
we're literally starving artists. It's
yeah,
fine.
it's true. Would you like to hear like a very bad story about a starving artist?
Oh,
My senior year of college, this is what happened. I was getting my senior thesis film, getting ready for our showcase. I
mhm.
was working on another short film project that was going to be shot in New Hampshire. I was in a production in of Mice and Men and a production of William Shakespeare's The Tempest, where I played Curly and Ferdinand. And here's the thing, the rehearsals for Of Mice and Men and Tempest were 2 hours from each other, and sometimes the rehearsals happened on the same day. I did not eat for a week.
Honey, no.
Yeah,
Why did you
I
do
know.
this?
You know what my friend did? She knew what was happening. So one day I went over to visit. She literally there is a door that goes into the kitchen that you can close and lock. She locked that door and locked the door to the outside and was like, "Here, have a donut. You are not
Have a
moving.
meal.
You are not moving until you eat this."
Have a meal for crying out loud.
Yeah. So that was that. Luckily that kind of thing has not happened again since.
Thank you. I'm one of those friends. It's like, have you eaten anything? I'll bring you a like pasta. Do you need something? It's okay to need food. Oh,
Yeah, but things have been really really busy. Also
mhm.
reading a lot of books, trying to read one a month, if not
Oh,
two a month if I can do it.
nice.
So I got to ask cuz I do want to get into the portion of sort of talking about you and how you started all this. But you mentioned books, and now
Yes.
my interest is piqued. So I gotta know first of all, what kind of books are you reading? Where does your interest
Ooh.
lie? And let's just go from there.
So I mostly read YA literature, but I also really love classic literature. I love reading books that have become classics for a reason. I also am trying to spread out and like branch out to different genres and try reading them. I tried reading one book series that is super trendy right now, and I just absolutely loathed it. I'm like, why do people like this? It's watered down Game of Thrones. I just don't like this at all. I like the idea of the world, but I it just wasn't executed well. Like Cody, there was a scene in the second book where they mentioned that toilets exist in this fantasy world. And I'm like, excuse me? What? What do you mean? What do you mean there's indoor plumbing in this world?
That
And
is
people try and defend it, be like, but it's magic. It's like,
no.
no, no, no. Oh my gosh. Like it's different in Harry Potter because Harry Potter is technically in the modern world.
Yep.
And the wizards have adopted this indoor plumbing business. But in a fantasy realm, absolutely not.
No,
So
absolutely not.
and for those listening, if you know what I'm talking about, you know what book series I'm talking about.
Look, they have buckets.
They have buckets. It's okay. But the book I just finished reading is a YA. It's a young adult novel called Everything Everything, and it was a very beautiful story about this girl who is very sick and has like an immunity disease, and she meets this boy that moves in across the street next door to her, and it's about like wanting to test the limits and like live essentially, and it's very sweet. It's a very sweet book, and I definitely recommend it. It was really really good. The next book that I'm currently reading is the Hunger Games Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes prequel, and so far I'm liking it. It also helps that the audiobook is narrated by Broadway star Santino Fontana, who, if you don't know, is also the voice of Prince Hans in Frozen.
Heck yeah.
So
Heck
it's
yeah.
right. So you play it and you're like, yay, good for him getting work. I'm so proud of him. That's what I
I
thought when I first heard it. I'm like, yay, good for Santino. So yeah, and I do want to branch into horror genre
nice.
because my dad loves horror movies and horror books. My dad has books about serial killers. And so this is how I became the person I am today. And so I'm trying to read more horror. So if you have any recommendations, let me know.
I just might. I will
Yay!
I will say, gotta be very careful with this because in the realm of horror
Mhm.
literature, you
Yeah.
can you can either go way too far on the deep end, or but if I'm gonna recommend something to you that I think would
Mhm.
be a good a good point, I'm gonna recommend the book that I was recommended,
Ooh.
which is essentially Jane Austen, but a haunting story. It's called The Turning of the Screw.
Okay, I'm writing this down right now.
I read that book. A friend of mine recommended it to me, gave it to me. I read it twice back to back. I loved it so much. And in terms of like classical horror, I would say The Graveyard Shift, which is a collection of
Ooh.
short horror stories from Stephen
Okay.
King. Like
Okay.
that's really really good. I
Okay.
think I'm gonna leave those there because I
Okay.
think those are good starting points as far as horror
Sweet.
literature go.
The
Would
only
not
other horror that I've read is like when I was a kid, I read the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, and I've
that is
also read some
amazing.
Stephen King. And so,
Yep.
yeah, like I
Yeah.
love Misery. Misery is so good. I almost got to go see it on stage on Broadway with Laurie Metcalf and Bruce Willis, and we didn't get to go, and my dad and I are still salty about that to this day that we didn't get to go. We were outvoted on what play we were gonna see that night, and I'm still so mad. I I don't think I'll ever be okay that I missed that.
Gotcha. I mean that's understandable. A buddy of mine, I felt well, two things. A friend of mine, Scotty, is doing a production of The Little Mermaid
Oh,
back in Maine, and he's playing Prince Eric. And
good for
then another friend of mine, Cody O'Toole, is doing a production of Rent,
oh,
and he's playing Collins. And here's the thing: for both Scotty and Cody, they auditioned for these productions with the same song. They auditioned
which
with
song?
"Proud of Your Boy" from Aladdin.
No!
And
You
here's the
got
thing:
into Rent by singing "Proud of Your Boy" from
the,
Aladdin?
the thing is, he
Good
got
job.
cast as a smaller part, and then the
Yeah.
director's like, "Yeah, so the person we had who was gonna play Collins left. I want to give you this role because of how good you are."
That's a promotion right there. That's an
Yeah,
upgrade.
yeah,
Congratulations.
yeah. That's what I said. As soon as he put the casting announcement out, my mouth was on the floor.
Congratulations.
Yeah, but books.
They're just so great.
Specifically audiobooks. Here's the thing. Speaking of schedules, I do not have time to sit down with a physical book anymore.
You know, something that I also like to look for besides audiobooks is dramatized radio plays of
Yep.
books. Somebody, because I've been wanting to read Wuthering Heights because I love Jane Eyre. Somebody sent me an audio dramatization of Wuthering Heights because I'm also a visual person, and I also ask people like, does anybody have a favorite like film adaptation of Wuthering Heights that I can watch after I finish reading the book? And people, mostly women, in my comments said the Tom Hardy version. And then one friend who sent me the dramatized radio play that goes, the Tom Hardy one's good, but this radio play is much closer to the book if you want to listen to it. Like, I appreciate your honesty.
You know what my one of my roommates got me when I was at BYUI?
Oh my, what is
Literally, it was just coming into spring semester. They got me the Jane Austen collection.
the best gift to give anyone?
Yeah, I agree. But the funny thing is, I find now that I am much more of an adult than I was back then.
Yeah,
Um,
I
I,
agree.
it's amazing how things can happen in 7 years.
I know. You're just suddenly like, well, I'm now very mature and I know how adult life works, I guess.
Yeah, I
I have a
guess.
question. So when you brought up Jane Austen, so if you like, I know a lot of people love Pride and Prejudice, but if you could pick like one that you feel is underrated, or like a Jane Austen story that you feel is could be another favorite,
Yep.
which one would you
Okay.
do?
Yep. I know exactly which one it is because and here's the thing. I'm going to list off the ones that I love but are not like besides Pride and Prejudice, there is another one that is
Ooh,
barely talked about. It's
yes.
not Emma, it's not Sense and Sensibility.
I think I know what it is.
I can if you think you know what it is, say it because I cannot think of the name right now.
Is it Persuasion?
Yes. Yes, it
Yes!
is.
Yes!
Persuasion is right under Pride and Prejudice for me. Like, nobody talks about it.
Guys, like, but one of the most romantic things you could ever read is Captain Wentworth's letter to
Mm-hmm.
Anne. Like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, I can't.
Yeah. If you guys want some piece of advice, number one, go pick up a copy of Persuasion because it's one that nobody ever reads and everybody
Please,
should. Number two, wear sunscreen every single day.
please,
Please.
please wear your sunscreen and reapply every 2 hours. I can't stress this enough. My friends will call me and be like, hey, I'm all sunburnt. Did you reapply your sunscreen? I'm supposed to reapply my sunscreen? Yes,
Yes.
yes. Oh,
Literally. I'm in the Georgia 97-degree heat, 60% humidity every day.
oh, see, I'm a hermit and I stay inside. I'm like, no, thank you. I don't like the sun. But if it's a
I don't
nice, gloomy, rainy day, I'm like, oh, heavens, it's a beautiful day. Open
Yeah.
the shutters. It's beautiful outside. For me, the other Austen story is it's Sense and Sensibility for me because I when I was in college, I had a roommate where she and I were basically Eleanor and Marianne. And so, like literally we would go to church together and everyone would say hi to her, which is fine because she's very nice. She's super popular. And my bishop would go and say hi to her, and I was standing right there and goes, "Oh, I didn't see you there." I'm like, "Hi." But you know what? That's okay because that was the side character I needed to be for a while. But
Apparently.
but like, oh, but I also have like other times where like she and I like understood each other as like Joe March and Beth March
Which
or
that is another phenomenal story.
oh,
But
mhm,
on that note, I want to talk about you and what got you started into acting and performing and why you got so passionate about all of this.
mhm. Well, it all started when I was a very small child.
Back in
Um,
1952.
back in my day in the old 20th century. Um, literally my first role ever, I was 3 months old. It was because our church did a, like, nativity walkthrough thing, like a pageant, and the rule was the newest born baby was to play the baby Jesus, and the parents were to play Mary and Joseph. Guess who was baby Jesus in the year of 1994?
You were cast as Jesus.
It was me. And I always joke like, should I put that on my resume? No, I'll never put it on my resume. But it's fun. It's a fun story. And my dad didn't memorize his lines. He put them on a piece of paper on the wall so he could and he always was like, no one wants to hear from me. Everyone wants to hear from Mary. Who cares about me? But what really got me into theater and doing acting was my again with church the stake or like whole congregation of like our church that we attended, they did a production of A Christmas Carol. And I can't remember if I was like, I know, right? Like they just were like, we're gonna do A Christmas Carol. Let's do it. And my mom, who also was a theater major, she went to Northwestern for theater. And she was in the production of A Christmas Carol. I remember I was put in like the daycare area so that my dad could go see the show. And my mom came to say hi, and she was dressed in like her full on like Dickens caroler outfit. And I thought, whoa, like I like the way she looks like, oh my gosh. And so don't know how I did it, but I pulled a Rugrats and snuck out of daycare and found my dad and sat and watched the show with him. And I remember watching my mom on stage. My mom played the Ghost of Christmas Past, and she played Belle, who is um, Ebenezer Scrooge's like long lost love of his life. And I remember watching that show and thinking, I want to be up there. I want to be up there and do that. Um, it wasn't until a few years later that my mom like you try out like different hobbies and stuff like you try dance, you try karate, you try um what softball and all that jazz. And then my mom signed us up for theater, and my first show ever was Annie, and I was the third orphan from the left, and that was my role. And ever since then I've just been doing it. And so, yeah, thanks, mom.
Thanks. that is that is third orphan from the left.
Like, I don't know what my name was as an orphan. They didn't give me a name. They just hired a bunch of kids. And they're like, you are going to be right here. And so my parents always joke to people, my daughter's playing the third orphan from the left in Annie. So it's
Would you
like,
like this is something we can relate on. Would you like to know what the first production I ever did was?
Oh, of course. It's always fun to find out people's first shows.
In elementary school, our school put on a production of Jack and the Beanstalk the musical for
Oh,
kids.
that's sweet.
Here's the thing. I played I played a dog. But here's the best part. My brother played Jack.
Wow, great. Wow, I'm only and I have a non-speaking role? What do you mean? What do you mean?
You know,
Girl.
me at like 5 years old.
Oh, like the absolute betrayal.
The
Oh my
rate the
gosh.
rate on this elementary school production is not worth my time.
They're not worth my talents.
Love that. Absolutely love that. So, okay. We know how you got here. We know
Mhm.
what you've been up to.
Yeah.
Let's dive into the deep end and let's talk about the mental health aspect of being inside of this industry.
Mm.
And it's like, first of all, what has your own, of course, whatever is in the means of what you're comfortable with sharing, what has your mental health journey been like?
Ooh, well, my mental health journey started when I was in my early teens. I developed very bad anxiety as a result of having a stalker when I was 14, and also, yeah, man. Uh, Church dances were no longer fun after that. Um, I made the mistake of giving you my phone number. It was terrible. But yeah, had a stalker when I was 14. I had a guy who, um, around the same age, was like constantly threatening me in class, and he found out where I lived, and it was just an absolute nightmare. And I learned at a very young age that I shouldn't report anything because they're not going to do anything. Then, when I was older, as I grew up in my adolescence, my anxiety attacks were like very intense. They were like I couldn't move, I couldn't speak. I had this adrenaline rush that would never end, and I was so nauseous. Um, and I would just tell my parents that I was sick. I didn't know what was wrong with me then. I just thought I was really, really sick. And then when I got older and I found out that it was called anxiety and these were anxiety attacks, then that completely changed everything. And unfortunately, these traumatic events bled into self sabotage when it came to dating and having a love life. And was it was very hard because you and I went to a school where people dated all the time and like were finding their husbands or wives or whoever it was. And I'm just trying my hardest not to throw up or have an intense anxiety attack before going on a first date with somebody that either I did know or that I didn't know. It wasn't until I was in a production after I graduated from college. It wasn't until I was in a production of Romeo and Juliet where I realized I needed to get help for my anxiety attacks and for my anxiety in general. I needed to start going to therapy. Um, that in itself was a whole experience where it was very hard, but I knew I had to I had to just do my job. I started going to therapy, and honestly, it changed my life because there were answers to questions that I didn't realize I had, or things that I didn't realize either I was doing or what was triggering me, or I found coping methods as to what I could do um, to help with the anxiety attacks. And so, really, it's it's been a very long road, and I wish I could go back in time and tell my younger self, like, who doesn't understand what's going on and why she feels this way, or like how scared she is to go to that church dance after that guy called on the phone again. Just that it's going to be okay. And I promise it's going to get better and that you are going to get the help you need. It's just going to take
Hmm.
time and you need to be patient. So that's pretty much what my mental health journey has been.
And I think, first of all, I want to say thank you for sharing that. And as people of this show will know, I have shared on a few occasions that, and I am an advocate for therapy day in and day out.
Amen.
Because the one thing, first of all, therapy in and of itself is kind of like dating. Not every therapist is gonna your who your therapist is and how they work with you is ultimately going to be dependent on what kind of personality you have, because that's the kind of personality that you have is going to, first of all, you got to find somebody who works with you, who understands your personality,
Mhm,
and who can work with you on that so you yourself can find answers. Like
mhm.
for me, I'm an extroverted person. I need to word vomit everything. And so that's what my current therapist does for me. Is she literally just occasionally asks a question but
Yeah.
lets me do all of the talking. And
Mhm,
there is another aspect that I sort of want to touch on, because
mhm,
now that I've got you here, I realize that in terms of my own mental health journey on this particular podcast, I haven't shared a ton, but there is one thing. Since we both went to this school, I
mhm.
feel I feel kind of obligated to talk about, and
Of
it's
course.
like it's like theater stuff, like the theater, like joking aside with Hiram and everything. The thing that I loved
Mhm.
most about being at BYUI was the community amongst all the students and the productions
Absolutely.
and everything else.
Absolutely.
But my time at Brigham Young University, Idaho, made me incredibly depressed, and
Oh god.
it was because of maybe it was culture shock from growing up in an environment where
Mhm.
certain things weren't so obligatorily pushed onto
Yes.
you and so you
Yes.
could think. And for me, being in a place where it's one thing I've had to work with my therapist on is something I like to call religious trauma. It's
Yeah.
like for me, my journey spiritually
Mhm.
and my belief system has morphed.
Yeah.
It's taken a long time, but one of my I think the first time that I realized was there was a problem. It was the last semester I was there.
Mhm.
I got into several fights with my roommates. And
Ooh.
there are two instances where this happened. One of them is where I got incredibly depressed, incredibly anxious because of a lot of the stuff that was going on, and I went to talk to my roommates about it, and they were doing things that were making me unhappy,
Mhm.
and they essentially said I wasn't being religious enough, and that's the
Oh.
reason why I was super depressed. The
Oh,
other
really?
the other instance, which was not something that necessarily had to do with me, but something that I saw my roommates were doing.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, one of my roommates, my first semester of college, got into a very, very deep relationship with someone, and it looked like things were going well and like they were going to get married. My last semester at this school, uh, found out that things didn't work out, things separated, as
Mhm.
relationships sometimes can go.
Mhm.
But he seemed like everything was fine. And over the course of the semester, he met someone that he started dating, and it seemed like things were good.
Mhm.
After coming, he picked me up at the theater department after we had one of our Wild Man rehearsals, and I
Mhm.
was I was having a conversation with him in his car as we were driving back. I was like, this, I mean, it seems like you and so are getting along. It's like, how do you think things are going to go?" And he said something along the lines of, I still have strong feelings for this other person, so
Mhm.
I'm only dating this person to give her a growing experience.
Okay, first of all, first of all, absolute ew, that's disgusting, and that is absolutely awful. That's like you are literally using someone and using their feelings. Like, honey, playing the field is not a thing anymore. That is not an okay thing to do anymore. It probably
No.
was a long time ago, and I mean like the 70s, but that's not okay to do now.
No. And the worst part
Absolutely
for
not.
me was, number one, this is someone that I had a great deal of respect for, like both semesters up until that point. And then I found out that one of my other roommates, he said something similar where he's like, I'm somebody who I'm interested in is coming to the school, but I'm just going to date this other person until they get here. And that
That's a waste of the
makes
other person's time. That's so gross.
exactly. And that mixed with what my other roommates at a certain point, my second to last semester, I moved out of one apartment into another, and
Mhm,
that's where some of my worst roommates were. I was raised in a house where it's sort of like, believe what you want to believe, but when you become an adult, ultimately you've got to make your own decisions and you've got to think about things. I was raised in a house where, like, not necessarily question everything, but think everything through and see if
mhm,
things make sense for you.
mhm.
And being in an environment where it's almost like religious dumping on what you should or should not be thinking about.
Yeah.
At Brigham Young University, Idaho, for me, it, it felt while I was there, it's like at first I was like, okay. And then I left after at the end of 2016 because I was burnt out, I was miserable, and
Oh, yeah.
I quit anything artistically for 2 years because of my experience there. And then for me, as my own mental health journey now, like that whole religious trauma thing is something I am actively still talking with my therapist about.
Mhm,
But the one conclusion that it's come back to is that I personally find myself to be a more spiritual person, and I am sure that there is a higher power or a god or whatever anybody wants
mhm,
to call it. I am sure there is something out there, but I am not a believer in institutions where it's very easy for somebody to take something that is something good or they deem is true
mhm,
and manipulate it to get some kind of a result. So for me,
mhm,
I know that it works for a lot of people. My parents are still, like, I love them to pieces, but
mhm,
I found that I am much happier and less depressed and filled with anxiety when I focus on being the best version of myself and being the most
mhm.
spiritual version of myself
Yeah.
instead of being attached to a religious institution in some way.
Mhm.
And so that's
And
that, along with a lot of other things, is sort of
yeah.
where my mental health journey is at this point.
Mhm. I really appreciate you opening up about that because, like, I honestly, myself, I have been going through a faith crisis recently. Since moving to Utah, it's been very hard. The culture in the LDS religion is very different here than it was back in California. Um,
Yeah,
and I have been talking to my therapist about it, and she has been amazing with helping me figure out, like, where do I stand and what I where my testimony lies and
yeah,
how she's coming from it, because I didn't want to approach my faith crisis by going to someone who's no longer a member, because they are going to do everything to convince me to leave.
yeah,
And
of
then
course.
if I go to, like, a bishop, they're going to convince me to stay or try to convince me to stay. So I wanted to go to somebody who would be a neutral party. And so I chose to go to a therapist that also specializes in faith crises. And how she has been going about it with me, which I've loved, is seeing from both perspectives. And so every week we've been doing a list where, like, this past week, it's been, what are things that you benefit from spiritually or from going to church? And then what are something you can do on Sunday if you didn't go to church that would still fulfill you spiritually? And it's been very, some of these lists have been so hard to write because I was born and raised in this church, and to, like, have the idea of stepping away or leaving is very hard because it's what you were raised in, and it's a very big part of your
Yeah,
life and upbringing. So I you are please know that you're not alone in that journey.
yeah.
And it's hard. It's so hard. Um,
I really appreciate you saying that. I think for
thank
me,
you.
there was uh talking with my therapist and especially my mother. Like, I cannot give enough praise to my mother through
Amen.
this whole situation, because the thing is, my parents, they are still attached to the church, but
Yeah.
they didn't start out that way. They
Mhm.
didn't join the church until they were in their 40s. And
Really?
my mother went on her own like faith-based journey where they went
Mhm.
through a few different places. They were Baptist at one point, they were
Oh,
Methodist at another, they were Catholic at another, and then they
mhm,
landed on the LDS church, and that is the thing that has worked for them.
mhm.
Um, and for me, it's interesting because there was a certain situation in my life when I was younger that was out of my control that I'm not going to talk about here,
That's okay.
but essentially, who I consider my parents and who my biological parents are,
Mhm.
two different parties.
Yeah.
And my biological parents, when I was younger, they basically did that same thing, a whole bunch of different churches. And then the LDS church is the one that my actual parents raised me in, and it's the one that seemed to do just fine.
Mhm.
um Working with my therapist and working through me, it's like that's above and beyond, like, and I knew for me, if I was going to make the decision to go through this, it couldn't be from a place of anger, and
Of course.
it's got to be
No.
more of a place of trying to figure out where I belong in the world. And
Mhm.
for me, I went to my therapist and my mother after this happened, because there was one point where I saw the kind of effect that my own personal storytelling and acting and everything else could have an effect on people,
Mhm.
because we had a showing at a drive-in theater of my feature film, the 2021. And
Mm.
after it was done, one person came up to me and said, I just want to thank you for what you're trying to do. And because the film was
Oh.
about depression and mental health and everything
Mhm.
else, and this was somebody that seemed like he was really down on his luck. And
Yeah.
so that was like the nail in the coffin for me, for where my mission for God, so to speak, is not the traditional sense of the phrase or the word, or what we're taught we need to be building up towards inside
Yeah.
of the LDS church.
Mhm.
My mission in life is to build a legacy and have an impact with
Mhm.
stories that that cause people to think and try to stir
Yeah.
change and everything else. And the biggest, I think the final nail in the coffin for me was, like, there are exceptions to every rule. You and a
Yeah.
lot of the other people that I am still have wonderful relations with, in terms of members of the church, like, they're still out there. But the one thing that I noticed is that when I decided, hey, I'm just gonna go like 150% into storytelling, like, this is what I'm gonna do. Still work on me spiritually, so I can be the best version of myself.
Yeah.
As soon as I made
Mhm.
that decision, basically everybody that I grew up with, everybody who said that they were my friends, everyone stopped talking to me.
See,
And
that makes me sad
yeah.
because you
So
know what? I hate when there are people that's what's hard about the culture sometimes is that
yeah,
there are people who choose to step away, and in my opinion, I'm like, "That is their choice and that is their journey." I am not going to judge them because I don't know what's going on with their life right now, and I still love them as a dear friend to me. But people who are just like, "How dare you do this?" I'm like, I'm very shocked by people who show their true colors when it comes to those things because we were taught as children, as little children, to love everyone equally as Christ did and still does. And it just it baffles me and it's things like that that really upset me when it comes to like I guess hypocrisy when it
yeah,
there is that can be found sometimes, but not always. I try one
yeah,
of the things that helps me to stay in the church that I guess I'm kinda just hanging on to is the good examples of people in the gospel, and so that's essentially my thoughts on that.
yeah. And I mean, this is the wonderful thing, and this is the thing that separates this from all of the discourse that is happening on the internet right now.
Right.
Is the fact that our own journeys in this area are they're not the same thing, but we're able
Mhm.
to just have a civil discourse about it.
Of
And
course.
the one thing that I have found that has thoroughly helped me is that the big thing that I still keep in mind is that Sundays are still a day of rest for me. Like, but
Yes.
the thing that I do is there is the entire loop is probably around 5 miles,
Mhm.
like a trail that's near my house. And what I do is I read a lot of self-help books. Like, I do
Mhm.
still delve in the world of fiction,
Of course.
but for instance, if I'm gonna shout out a couple of them, I'm currently reading a book that is called The Body Keeps the Score, which is
Mhm.
I'm not gonna try to pronounce the author's name, but it is a book all about trauma and how
Wow.
trauma, no matter no matter how much we may try to get rid of it, any amount of trauma that we experience in our life, especially when we're in that impressionable phase of our life, it
Yeah.
is it is not just something that goes away. It is something that
No.
is a part of our skin and our cells and a part of who we are. And it's a very heavy book because it does deal with a lot of very, very uncomfortable triggering topics in terms of,
Mhm.
because it deals with talking about the military and people who are assault survivors, and
Yeah.
but it whittles it down to such a way to understand like certain things that can help you not only understand yourself better and what you may have gone through, but also how to reach out and understand other people.
Mhm.
And the second one, and this is one I have shouted out a few times on this podcast, is a book called Atomic Habits by James Clear. And
Oh, yeah, I know that one.
it is a wonderful, wonderful book. And for me, it's something that changed my life because in essence, the whittled down version is habits is not something that you build up over the course of a day, a week, a month, or a year. Habits, very much like any kind of career out there or raising a good family, is something that takes your entire life to do.
Yes.
And my favorite principle that he puts is something that he calls the 2-minute rule. And it's this rule where take any amount of tasks, like any unpleasant task that you might have to do, and
Yeah.
whittle it down, like whatever the beginning stages are, to something you can do in just 2 minutes. For
Mhm.
instance, let's say you gotta write an essay for college. Anybody can open up their laptop and open up a Google Docs page.
Mhm.
Literally do that, walk away, and then come back to it. More than likely,
Mhm.
you're going to be able to get something more done.
Yeah.
And so it's stuff like that for me that I have found is my own sort of spiritual sanctuary in a way, and just
Mm.
also just trying to be a good person and
Yeah.
helping people out.
I like that a lot, because 'cause I've been thinking about it lately. I'm like, I wish I could do things like meditate, but sadly, my brain goes like 1,000 miles an hour, and it will not be quiet. And so, there are things where I'm like, "What can I do that, like, could fulfill me spiritually?" But I'm like, it's still something that I'm in the process of thinking about, and still something that I'm working on with myself.
Yeah, and that's what this is all about, and ultimately that is what mental health is all about. It's
Mhm.
mental health once again. As we've established, I'll just put my age out there. I'm 27. I have been working on this stuff since I was 14 years old. Like,
Yeah,
it's 13 years.
it's a lot
And
of work.
the thing is, you always find something new that you can do to
Mhm.
improve yourself.
Yeah.
It's and I agree with you on the meditation thing.
Like, why is this hard? It looks so simple for other people.
But you know what I find the easiest way to sort of trick your way into doing it?
Mhm.
Like, there is one spot, if you've got to go anywhere, that you cannot get away from,
Mhm.
and that is when you drive.
Oh, yeah.
And so what I've done, even if it's not like a long period of time, I'll be
Mhm.
driving into my car and I'll just like in through nose, out through mouth like 3 times. And if I want
Mhm.
to do more, I'll do more. But literally, it's just calming yourself down when you can't get away from anything. And especially if you're in heavy traffic where people don't know how to drive, that also helps.
Well, yes. Honestly, one of my coping methods for, trying to get out of my intense anxiety attacks, is the segment from The Tonight Show from Jimmy Fallon, the hashtag videos where it's people's tweets, and I have a playlist of my favorite ones so that if it happens, I can be like, time to whip out the playlist. But yeah, just either like media that makes me laugh or like certain games that I have to play to like try and get my brain off from an anxiety attack like that's how it works for me. How do you deal with your anxiety attacks? Do you meditate? Do you do breathing exercises?
No.
I watch Jimmy Fallon. I watched my favorite episode of The Nanny.
Love
That
it. I was raised on that show.
honestly, the episode that gets me out of it, it's my favorite episode. It's the one where Fran and Cece get locked in the wine cellar. That's the one. And
Oh, let's
she like
see.
does Cece's hair, her nails, and at some point she's like trying to name off all 31 flavors of ice cream from Baskin Robbins. And she's like, "Oh wait, I forgot the sherbets. I'll start again. Vanilla." Cece just screams like, "Stop!" But yeah, I'm like, no, I watch sitcoms. But I didn't.
Love it.
Like, do you ever have that? Did you ever have that moment where you realized you were having, like you needed to go back to therapy or that you needed help?
Yeah. There's been a couple of times.
Mhm,
Funny enough, that story I talked about before, where
mhm.
I was doing the films and I was doing the plays all at the same time.
Janky.
Um, and for anybody, which first of all, mad respect to any college student out there, you know that basically you get up in the morning, you do not stop until the day is done.
No.
Ugh,
Ugh.
it's every day. But during that time, I was also working at Home Depot.
Oh, Home Depot.
And I was not having the greatest experience and I was miserable. And so it was at that time. Also, I'm incredibly stubborn. So if I do decide to go to therapy, it usually takes a lot of poking and prodding from family and
Mhm.
friends. And
Same.
so I did one meeting, and my therapist said something along the lines of, well, what is going to happen if you keep working there? Is something bad going to happen?
Mhm.
Are you going to be miserable? What is keeping you there? Do you think there's a possibility that you won't get another job if you leave? Like,
Yeah,
what do you think's going to happen? And I'm like, I sat back. I'm like, holy smokes. This is
you're
my,
right.
this is like this is one of my last semesters of college. This should be something I should be enjoying right now. But
Exactly.
this is only like taking away everything. And then, the other time was the other thing was just big transitional points.
Yeah.
After I finished up the feature film, that was a big thing where I
Mhm,
needed to go back to therapy. I had a uh I had a falling out with somebody a couple of years ago, uh
mhm,
who I thought was a good friend, turned out not to be so great. Had to go back to therapy for that.
mhm,
And then while I've been in here in Georgia, just because there's been so much going on, I've just it's less so of like I feel miserable and more so of I need somebody that I can actually get all of this out to and see
mhm.
if they can give me some strategies with how to deal with it. Because there's a lot
Yes.
of days, lots of days, you just feel overwhelmed, and
Ugh.
that's sort of the transitional period
Mhm,
when it comes to therapy. Because once you're in a good place, going to therapy becomes less about trying to heal the trauma you've got, and
mhm,
more so about trying to figure out if there's somebody who can make you see a strategy for how you want to move forward with things
mhm.
that you can't currently see because you feel so overwhelmed.
Yeah. I I didn't realize I didn't accept I was having a faith crisis until my family and I were watching Footloose, and
I
right? Like, wow. This is how things come to me and how I realize things is through media. But we were watching Footloose, and it's the scene just before prom, I guess, when the daughter of the preacher goes up, like they're talking, and she says, "I don't know if I believe everything you believe." And I was like, "I am not going to cry. I'm not going to do this right now
I may
because
relate.
oh no, I relate." And that was when I was like, "Okay, I got to tell people that I'm struggling, and I should also seek a therapist." Um, but when I knew I needed to go back to I needed to start going to therapy. Yeah, that was a whole thing. And by the way, you're not alone. I also had to heed the advice to end a friendship that I um loved, but sadly um I couldn't do it anymore. Um it became very difficult, and it's so hard to let go of those friends that you love very dearly.
Yeah.
Um but it was something that I had to do for me. It was something I had to do for my mental health. And I it was very, very hard. And it was probably one of the hardest decisions I had ever had to make. And it also doesn't help when, well, it does help, but all you're thinking is, "Are you sure?" When you talk to other people about it and they tell you all the same thing, and it's like, you've gotta let this friendship go. That's hard. And I was friends with them for 7 or 8 years, almost 8 years. And yeah, that was very hard. I do wish them well, and I hope that they are doing good and in the world right now. But I and did have to close that chapter, and it's very hard. It's never easy to do something like that.
No, no, it's not. It's once again, it's all part of growing. One of the big things that
Mhm,
was very revelatory for me because of a lot of the things that happened to me when I was younger.
mhm.
My sort of attachment stuff. I was very anxious, and
Yeah.
I was the kind of person who was ultimately I could not be in a room alone for my with myself for any period of time because
Mhm,
I didn't like who I was as a person. I was afraid that everybody was going to leave me, and I I didn't think I would really be able to make anything of myself. But through therapy
mhm,
and everything else, it's like that's the key thing that my therapist has sort of taught me is the fact that if you ultimately for specifically the goals that I have, which is as already established, building a legacy and making a difference, if you want to do all of those things and you want to have maximum impact, you've got to realize that a majority of the time you are going to be by yourself because 90 to 95% of the people are just not going to understand what you're shooting for. And you've got to be okay with that. You've got to be okay with who you are as a person. You've got to
mhm,
keep growing as a person. And the happier you are by yourself as a person, the more quality people will come into your life and stay there.
mhm. It's so true. It's so, so true. Ugh. Shout out to the quality people who stay.
Yeah.
Like,
Shout out.
"Thank you."
Seriously.
Um, but yeah.
Yeah. But now that we're here, I wanna pass it over to you one last time to sort of shout out anything that you are either proud of or that you're working towards, and any last minute pieces of advice you'd like to give.
Let's see. For me, if you are going through any sort of um faith crisis, like if specifically you're part of the LDS faith, there is somebody on Instagram that I follow that I feel like has very modern takes on the gospel and on the belief system. And that is Dr. Julie Hanks on Instagram. Absolutely love her. She also has a business practice in the state of Utah. So if you're in the state of Utah, or there might be some in other states, I'm not sure. But if you're interested in looking at there, I would absolutely recommend it. Um, and then for, let's see, for advice, I would say one of the most important things that I have been taught in many different ways is um well, one, you're not alone, and please do not worry about being afraid to get help, because getting help and choosing to get help is one of the bravest things that anyone can do. It does not matter what the circumstances are or where you are right now in life. If you feel like you need someone to talk to or need that guidance, please do that, because it could absolutely change your life. It's changed mine. I I'm very proud of the little girl who was scared to death to go to school, to go to a church dance, because she didn't know what to do and was honestly just naive. And tell her that I'm very proud of her for doing the best she could in the time that it took to get help. So I would say, finally, there's a quote I love from Audrey Hepburn. Um, the quote is, "Nothing is impossible. The word itself says, I'm possible." And for me, that's a quote that I try to live by every single day, no matter what is going on. So thank you so much for having me on here, Cody. I really appreciate it. I really liked this discussion that we had.
It's beautifully put. And I'm just gonna uh go off of that and say, first of all, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for coming on. There is a quote that I would also like to share, going on top of that, and that is, for any of you who are struggling, who are like myself, who want to make a difference, and more of like an international, worldwide difference than just a difference to your hometown. Just keep in mind that on your journey to greatness, you're going to make some people angry, and you're going to lose people, but once again, the people that truly matter and the people who do understand you are the people who will stick around, and ultimately they are the people that you should listen to and take advice from the most. And more than anything else, if this episode has said anything, I have talked about therapy on every episode of this podcast. And if there is one thing that this episode has done, it is shown that we are both the biggest advocates for therapy,
Mhm,
because what it does, more than anything else, it will allow you to, in a theater and performing sense, get outside of yourself and take a look at your body from an outside perspective to
mhm,
see what you can do to make yourself better and to help you on this journey, because it is a journey. It's a marathon, not a sprint. It's a lifelong process of just getting better and better and better, so you can be the best version of yourself, for yourself first, and then the people in the world around you.
mhm.
So if anything and everything, please take that advice. This has been the Artists and Emotions Podcast. I'm your host, Cody Alexander Curtis, and we certainly hope that you've been able to take something from this conversation that you can bring with you on your own mental health journey. But for now, my name is Cody Alexander Curtis. This is the Artists and Emotion Podcast, and I'll see you all next time.